Good afternoon to you. I'm Danilo Evangelista, and welcome to our weekly tropical weather outlook video. Today, Saturday, February 15th, 2025. We're now halfway through the month of February. Let's start off this week's video by going over, as we normally do, sea surface temperature anomalies across the Western Hemisphere. At least that's where we are, and that's generally our main focus. Starting off in the Atlantic, sea surface temperature anomalies remaining very warm, and they've remained warm so far throughout the entire winter. And boy, especially in the Gulf, look at how warm the Gulf has been. Some of these anomalies here reaching pretty much off the scale, especially in the central Gulf and even along the northern Gulf Coast too. Some anomalies here as high as 2 to even 3 degrees Celsius. We're actually going to revisit this in just a moment, but this is going to be really significant because it's going to have a factor into weather probably coming up today and over the next week as well. And obviously this too will be a very important factor when it comes to hurricane season if this warmth does persist, which I think it might, especially given that the Gulf of Mexico has pretty much been this warm nearly the entire winter so far. And even with the huge Arctic fronts that we've gotten, things have kind of just remained this warm in the Gulf and even throughout the Caribbean too, and even off the southeast coast. And actually off the southeast coast as well, it's warmed up quite a bit over the last several weeks. We've kind of gotten a little bit more of a southeast ridge setup over the last several weeks, or a stronger Bermuda high setup, which is probably what's led to the Gulf being really warm, especially as it is right now. And this setup is going to lead to some severe weather today across the southern U.S. We'll talk about that, and probably an active week of weather continuing off of the active week of weather we had this week. It's going to continue into next week, and not only with severe weather, but we also have to watch potentially for quite a bit of heavy rain across the south and generally the eastern half of the U.S. and some winter weather too. But we'll go over that later on. For now, let's just take a look at our typical off-season tropical weather stuff, and that obviously is the entire Atlantic has remained warm, and then out here in the Pacific, we still have our La Nina. But especially if you saw my Twitter post this past week, I'm not sure really how much longer this La Nina is going to persist. In fact, it really looks like it's barely holding on. In fact, if you look at the Eastern Pacific, you could see a lot of these warmer anomalies already beginning to fill in. And it'll be very key to see how quickly the Pacific warms up, especially along the equator, how much of these warm anomalies begin to fill in across the rest of the equatorial Pacific, obviously, because that'll mean, are we going to have an El Nino later this year, or if not, of course, the implications for what it will be for hurricane season, which is coming up in a few months in June. But really not much else beyond speculation and just having to watch to see how much longer does La Nina persist, and whether and how much does this warmth fill in across the equatorial Pacific. But I will say, at least with La Nina, really am beginning to wonder just how much longer this La Nina is going to persist. One reason that being the SOI, pretty strong right now, actually, and this is really a positive for La Nina because usually an SOI that is very strongly positive, especially the way it is right now, the current 30-day average is 13 points and the 90-day average is 8 points. And I say that specifically because if you watch my channel, you know that the SOI, especially when the long-term averages are above 7 points, usually that means the atmosphere is at least responding in a way favorable for La Nina conditions across the Pacific. But if we take a look at the sea surface temperature anomalies, at least over the last several days, or this is a plot that extends all the way out to since December, but the latest value, at least updated as of yesterday, with the sea surface temperature anomalies in the Nino 3.4 region in the Pacific, which really quickly, just to give you an idea of what the Nino 3.4 is, it's pretty much roughly right around here, this region of the equatorial Pacific, because that's where we monitor ENSO conditions and whether or not we're in an El Nino or a La Nina. And right now, the latest value of the Nino 3.4 is negative zero point 0.4 degrees Celsius. And that's actually below the threshold, at least that NOAA usually uses for La Nina, which is negative zero point 0.5. So pretty much meaning that the daily value so far is actually below La Nina conditions. So it seems like, at least, and you can even see since last month, we've been on a quite stark uptrend with sea surface temperature anomalies across the equatorial Pacific as well. And you can even see that in the anomalies, the T-depth anomalies, meaning the anomalies that extend below the surface along the equator in the Pacific. And this is pretty much, and let me actually really quickly refresh this because it looks like it stopped the animation. You could see over the last several weeks, we had for a while building cold anomalies along the equatorial Pacific, but especially since last month, the cold anomalies are still there, but they're definitely beginning to lose. They're definitely beginning to slowly break up and lose their potence, and are even starting to see, at least closer to the surface, and this is at least in the Eastern Pacific, you could start to see, and you could actually, once again, look back at this map and see in the Eastern Pacific, we are starting to see quite a bit of these warmer sea surface temperature anomalies begin to fill in, and you could see that in the subsurface map as well, over the last several weeks, especially. These warmer sea surface temperature anomalies are beginning to fill in, and especially look towards the west. This is in the Western Pacific and roughly within the maritime continent around the Philippines, and generally everything west of the 180-degree line, which is roughly right here. This is the Western Pacific, and you're starting to see quite a bit of warmth beginning to build up. It's not making its way eastward yet, and we're starting to see these anomalies begin to make their way up and connect with these anomalies here in the Eastern Pacific, because if that were to happen, that would be a signal that El Nino is trying to develop. So these anomalies are not making their way over to the Eastern Pacific quite yet, but this definitely signals that there is some warmth. And usually that's what happens, is eventually as these colder anomalies begin to erode, these warmer anomalies begin to fill in, and eventually they lead towards El Nino development. And that's actually, coincidentally, what quite a few climate models, at least the models that have been released over the past month, have indicated might happen later this year. So we'll have to watch and see what exactly happens. But just as another indicator, this is the zonal wind anomalies along the Pacific. And you could see as well, really quickly, just to get you a sense of what to look out for, these greens and blues indicate stronger trade winds across the equatorial Pacific, while these yellow and reds indicate weaker trade winds. And generally, stronger trade winds, when you see especially this signal here, and this is in the past, this has already happened. And then really quickly, just to give you an idea of how to read this map, above this black line is what's happened in the past, and below this black line is the forecast for the future. And you can see, especially along the equatorial Pacific, we had strong trade winds, but now we're in a moment of weaker trade winds, and that probably explains, if we really quickly go back to this map, why we've seen quite a stark increase in the sea surface temperature anomalies, especially along the equatorial Pacific and in the Nino 3.4 region. And that does seem to last for at least the next week or so. And then it does seem like some of these stronger trades will return. So maybe we'll see La Nina barely hold on for dear life. But the longer these westerly winds come in, and the stronger they are, and the more they persist, the more we're probably going to eventually see this La Nina completely erode away. And it's probably going to happen soon. And once again, that's just going to lead to a whole bunch of questions as to what the future of ENSO will be, especially when it comes to hurricane season this year, which is what a lot of people have questions for, especially given, as I mentioned, there are quite a few climate models, and I think we did review some of them last week, like the European seasonal. They show quite a bit of warming into potentially an El Nino come this summer for hurricane season, and those will have its implications on potentially will that affect this hurricane season, and that maybe this year might not be as active, or maybe we might still have an active season. ENSO either way is a huge factor for hurricane season, which is why I bring it up, and it's one of the main factors we watch in the off season, because that's kind of something that you can watch and see it evolve, because of obviously its significance on hurricane season. Lots of questions to watch with that, and we'll certainly be watching charts, especially like the zonal wind anomalies, and especially this chart here with the Nino 3.4. We'll be watching these over the next several weeks, especially as we get into the spring. But really quickly, do want to bring up sea surface temperatures in the Gulf. These are the actual sea surface temperatures, and this is kind of pivoting a little bit more towards current weather across the United States right now, because it is very active. And you can see in the Gulf, very, very warm sea surface temperatures. In fact, this is the 26-degree line, 26 degrees Celsius waters, which is the minimal sea surface temperature marking that you need for hurricane and tropical storm development, already extends pretty far into the Gulf. And in fact, the shelf waters along the northern Gulf Coast are almost close to 20 degrees Celsius, or at least the 20 degrees Celsius line is very close to the northern Gulf Coast shelf waters. In fact, it's even present right off the southeastern Louisiana coastline. Bottom line, the Gulf is very warm. Going back to this map with the sea surface temperature anomalies, you could definitely see that with the anomalies. And in terms of the actual sea surface temperatures too, the Gulf is very warm, widespread 25 and even some 26s, and even a little bit of 27 poking out from the Caribbean. And this is going to be a very, very huge factor to keep in mind. Obviously, it has its implications for hurricane season because, more probably warmer Gulf means higher upper ocean heat content values, which is also significant because it's the Gulf of Mexico, or Gulf of America if you're following the new term that it's being designated, and there's a whole lot of controversy for that, but I'm just going to call it the Gulf for this situation. Obviously the Gulf is right in our neck of the woods, especially when it comes to, hurricanes that usually develop and then rapidly intensify, and then they make landfall most of the time along the northern Gulf Coast. That's significant for that, but it's also significant for severe weather and helping fuel weather systems that obviously impact us across the South. They fuel severe weather across the South, and they also lead to significant, potentially sometimes winter weather systems that get their origins in the Gulf and then move off the East Coast, and then sometimes bring lots of heavy snow to the Northeast. And I'll show you where I'm going with that in a minute, because it looks like we might actually have the potential for that this upcoming week. But at least as of right now, this warmth in the Gulf also means lots of moisture that's going to be transported into the eastern United States. And as you can see, we have a lot of active weather right now, especially when it comes to rain. All of these greens and reds in here indicates flash flood watches, or at least these greens indicate flood watches, and these reds, especially across portions of Kentucky and Tennessee, those are flash flood warnings. Very high risk for flooding. There's going to be lots of heavy rain, as a huge storm system is going to be moving across the east. That's also going to bring some winter weather to portions of northern New England and Maine, and also across the northern Midwest as well. So we have winter weather advisories and winter storm warnings in effect. And there's even, what are these? Extreme cold watches. very huge indication as well that there's a lot of cold air. So obviously that indicates winter weather. And across the south, I guess we don't have those watches and warnings up yet, and I actually really quickly refresh to see if we're going to get those. But we're probably going to see very shortly, probably some severe weather watches go up across the south because they're expecting severe weather today. And really quickly, this is the Weather Prediction Center to touch on the excessive rainfall risk as noted by all the flood watches. At least after the Weather Prediction Center, yeah, this is the day one excessive rainfall outlook. High chance for potential flash flooding, and you're already seeing that play out across portions of Tennessee and Kentucky right now. Flash flood warnings currently in effect, and there's a high risk today for flash flooding, which, according to the key, is 70%. So lots of heavy rain, and we always talk about with tropical cyclones, the number one threat is not the wind, but it's the water, it's the storm surge, and it's the flooding rain. And obviously, you don't need tropical systems to produce heavy rain, especially heavy rain that ends up leading to flash flooding, and that's exactly what we're getting today. And then obviously, to that as well, we're going to have severe weather across the south. And this is today's prediction by the Storm Prediction Center for severe weather. An enhanced risk, let me really quickly go to the categorical outlook, an enhanced risk across parts of Mississippi, even through parts of Tennessee as well, and then generally across Arkansas, Louisiana, Alabama, quite a expansive area where there's an enhanced risk for severe weather today. And that, once again, comes from the fact that we have lots of moisture and humidity coming from the Gulf, obviously because it is very warm. And that'll be a very significant thing when it comes to severe weather season 2. The fact that the Gulf is very warm is really going to help enhance severe weather outbreaks across the South, especially that this year we're kind of coming off a La Nina, and the pattern usually in these kind of years tends to be more favorable for an active severe weather pattern. And that's what we're getting right now. Enhanced risk for today. And we actually have a pretty significant tornado risk as well, as much as a 10% chance across the South with a hatched area. This is what these black lines indicate, and that indicates the potential for an EF2 to an EF5 tornado within 25 miles of a point. That's not really relevant to me. That just generally indicates, especially when you see this hatched area, indicates elevated potential not only for tornadoes, but strong tornadoes as well. There's even a very significant chance for wind, which obviously causes damage, down trees, leads to power outages, especially if they crash onto power lines. So obviously there's that threat too. And then there's hail, which is not that significant. It looks like it's more going to be a tornado and wind event day, and obviously very heavy rain. And then as we move to tomorrow, that severe weather risks moves to the east and moves to northern Florida and off the southeast coast. And there's still the tornado and wind threat, but it's not as significant. But generally, lots of active weather coming up over the next several days, and I'll even show it to you here on the GFS model. You could see it from today into tomorrow. Strong low pressure developing over Kentucky. This obviously leads to a strong cold front to develop, and that'll obviously bring severe weather across the South. And then, boy, this actually develops into a quite strong low pressure over the Northeast. That obviously will bring lots of snow to northern New England and southern Canada as well, which is why we have the winter storm warnings in effect. And also, as this low pressure moves off and away, notice these very close, tightly together compacted isobars probably means very strong winds coming from this system, and generally, judging by the flow, probably lots of strong northerly winds, so probably a very cold day across the Northeast on Monday as this system moves out. And this will be very, very significant because, kind of skipped ahead a little bit, come later next week, once again, we have another low pressure that develops Across the Gulf Coast, looks like more rain once again for the Gulf. Really going to get a lot of rain next week. And then once again, winter weather on the northern fringes. And then this low pressure, now we're heading into Thursday, so we're heading into the latter part of next week. Low pressure moves off the East Coast, and quite quickly strengthens 996. This is 12Z Thursday, so this is Thursday morning. And then Thursday afternoon, look at that, 984 millibar low, right off the mid-Atlantic and southern New England coasts. And take a look at all of these dark blues that you see in here, indicating quite heavy snow. And this is significant for one of two reasons. One, and this has actually caused quite a bit of talk, especially today, because it's not just the GFS that shows a strong, quite potent storm system off the mid-Atlantic coast late next week. But, shift this just 50 to 100 miles to the west, and this is a crippling winter storm across the mid-Atlantic and southern New England coast, probably dumping a foot to even 2 feet of snow for many widespread areas. And in fact, as I mentioned, the GFS is not the only model showing this. In fact, today, the ICON model, which let's actually take a look at it right now. You see the storm system develops, becomes very strong, and the ICON not only has this closer to the coast, but even has it as a stronger low, 979 millibars, right off the southern New Jersey coast. And man, that's quite an intense look. Probably that's giving the look of probably the most significant and intense winter weather event, probably for the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic coastline that they've gotten, especially over the last several years. And this is significant, as I was saying, one, because obviously the GFS is not the only model showing it. This is the ICON as well. And let's see, does the European show this? Yeah, they do. All the models have this, for one. And for two, this is not one of those fantasy GFS runs or even Euro runs sometimes that they show 360 hours out. No, this is 5 days. This is later next week, so this is within a reasonable time frame to watch. And yeah, we might be watching the potential for a pretty significant winter storm to impact the Northeast. One of those events that brings heavy snow. Although there will be heavy rain for some, but especially very heavy snow, all the way from DC, at least if you're going by the ICON, all the way from DC to even Boston. Looks like they might, one of those classic Northeast winter dumps that bring heavy snow all the way from DC to Boston. This setup definitely looks favorable for that. And it's 5 days, and when it comes to winter weather, and this is actually why I don't really like tracking winter weather, because even 5 days out, I mean, we know for hurricanes, 5 days is an eternity, but it's also like that for winter weather, and a lot can change in these next 5 days, but all of the models have it. It's a reasonable time frame. It's not like it's 7 days out that this is happening. So this might be something pretty significant to watch for the Northeast, especially if you're a winter weather lover next week and you're lacking. I know a lot of people, especially along the coastline, especially the New York City metro and areas surrounding that, have been lacking with heavy snow, especially in recent years. This might make up for it. This might be the storm to watch. And we'll see. It's over the next upcoming week, and we'll definitely update you if this is indeed something that we might be needing to watch over the next week. So we'll probably do another video for that. So stay tuned for that if you want to see those updates. And also if you're into our tropical weather stuff too. It's only February, but trust me, hurricane season will be coming quick, especially because this upcoming week is the 100-day mark till hurricane season begins. And usually once we get past that 100-day mark, especially when we get into March and April, you watch, the off season is going to fly by, and before you know it, we'll be in hurricane season, which is why watching stuff like ENSO It's always best to do it now, and it's really important that we start to watch it now because it'll definitely have implications once we get to hurricane season. Other than that, though, not much else going on, so we're going to end it off for today. Thank you for tuning in. If you like what you saw, I really appreciate it, and heavily encourage if you like, comment, subscribe, share with family and friends. Let me know what you think as well in the comments if you have any thoughts of your own, whether it be hurricane, tropical related, or winter weather related as well. If you have any questions as well, leave them in the comments too. Stay safe. Peace, love, and kindness to you all, and we'll probably talk again very, very soon, probably over the next upcoming week.